I'm Rosalind Barrow, 77 years old, and even though I raised my only son by myself, worked double shifts to keep food on the table, and rocked both my grandbabies to sleep when they were newborns. These days, I wait by the phone like a stranger, hoping to be remembered last week. A cream-colored envelope showed up in my mailbox, and the handwriting on it made my chest tighten. It was from my daughter-in-law, Lizzie, the kind of woman who speaks like she's handing out grades, not kindness, the invitation said. I was welcomed to Rebecca's 15th birthday dinner this Saturday at 7 p.m. No warmth, no message, just a formality. But after a year of silence, it might as well have been a telegram from the moon. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been made to feel like a guest in your own family. I grew up in a town called Bowers, raised by people who believed in hard work, clean clothes, and not talking back. My father worked at the mill till his back gave out, and my mother kept house with a quiet kind of grace. I never had much, but I never felt poor. I married Roy Barrow when I was 22. He was gentle, thoughtful, the kind of man who'd offer his coat to a stranger and not ask for it back. We had one boy, Neville, and when Roy was killed in a car accident, Neville was just 9. I buried my husband with one hand and packed my son's lunch with the other. I gave up nursing school, took whatever jobs I could find. Supermarket janitor, diner waitress, office cleaning. I clipped coupons, sewed clothes, walked to work so Neville could take the bus to school without shame. He was a smart boy, always dreaming big, and I made it my mission to give him a life with more doors than mine ever had. He got into college, became an engineer, married a girl named Lizzie from one of those teacher families with matching place settings and degrees on every wall. I thought we'd found our happy ending. For a while we were close. I babysat Rebecca and Christopher when they were small. I cooked Sunday dinners, tied shoes, brought homemade pies. Lizzie used to thank me back then, said she didn't know how she'd manage without me. But slowly, things changed. Calls got shorter. Invitations stopped coming. One Thanksgiving, I showed up with a roasted turkey, only to be told the meal had been catered. A stranger in an apron opened the door and asked who I was. The last time I stepped foot in Neville's house was for Christopher's birthday. That was 6 months ago. I sat in the corner like a dusty photograph no one remembered to take down. When I left early, no one noticed. And now this invitation. No warmth, no call. Just a card tucked in with the bills. I should have thrown it away, but I didn't. Because 15 is an important year. Because I still remembered the softness of Rebecca's hair when she fell asleep on my shoulder. The morning of the party, I ironed my navy dress, the one with the white collar. Too plain for Lizzie's crowd, I knew, but it was clean, respectable. I wrapped the silver hand mirror, a gift from my grandmother, in tissue and ribbon. It was the only thing of value I had to pass on. The cab arrived at 7 sharp. I remember how the driver smiled when I told him where I was going. Family dinner, I said. They're always special. I didn't have the heart to tell him it had been a long time since I felt special anywhere. And when Neville opened that door when he saw me standing there, I knew. They never expected me to come. Neville stood in the doorway like he'd opened it to a delivery he hadn't ordered. He glanced at the gift bag in my hand, then over my shoulder, like he was checking if anyone had seen. "You made it," he said, stepping aside. "Not welcome or good to see you. Just that." I walked in, slow, careful not to track in the rain. The house smelled like one of those catalog candles, something floral and sharp. There were about 24 people scattered around the living room and dining area. Most of them I didn't recognize. They all looked polished pearls, pressed shirts, glasses of wine already in hand. A soft, instrumental track played over the speakers, something modern but polite. Rebecca wasn't in sight. Lizzie came into view from the kitchen wearing a crisp cream blouse and slacks that probably needed dry cleaning. "Rosalind," she said, giving a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're early. We were just finishing up setting the table." Her tone had that sing-song edge to it, like a teacher reminding a child to stay in their lane. "I brought something for Rebecca," I said, holding up the bag. She didn't even glance at it. "Lovely," she said. "Neville, could you show your mother where she's sitting?" He led me into the dining room, where the table stretched long and narrow under a chandelier I'd never seen before. Each place was marked with a handwritten name card, thick cardstock gold ink. At the far end, closest to the hallway, I saw it. Rosalind, not near Rebecca, not near Neville or Lizzie. Right by the sideboard next to an extra chair tucked halfway out of view. I smoothed the front of my dress and took my seat without a word. Guests trickled in and filled their spots, laughter rising and falling in waves. I folded my hands in my lap, nodding politely when introduced. Lizzie's parents were there, and her sister too. Everyone looked relaxed, cheerful, like they were exactly where they belonged. Rebecca entered the room just after 7, dressed in pale pink hair, swept up the same dimple showing in her left cheek when she smiled, just like her daddy used to have when he was little. People clapped as she walked in. Someone handed her a bouquet. She hugged her other grandmother and kissed Lizzie's cheek. When she finally made it to my side of the table, she gave me a small wave and said, "Thanks for coming, Grandma," before being pulled into another round of greetings. Dinner was served in courses, salad soup, something with fish, followed by lemon cake. Lizzie made sure to thank the caterer, whose name I didn't catch, and spoke at length about the importance of seasonal produce. At one point, Neville leaned toward me and said, "Try not to make any big speeches. All right, Lizzie wants to keep things low-key." I blinked at him. I wasn't planning to say anything. He nodded like he was relieved. Then he turned his attention back to the center of the table where Rebecca and her friends were laughing over something on someone's phone. I let my hand rest gently on the ribbon of the gift bag in my lap. The hand mirror inside was wrapped in lavender tissue, the silver frame freshly polished. It had belonged to my grandmother, then my mother, then me. I'd waited for the right time to pass it on. 15 seemed right. When dessert was cleared, Lizzie stood to make a toast. "Rebecca," she said, raising her glass, "you are the light of our lives. We are so proud of you, your grades, your kindness, your grace. You remind me so much of my mother at your age." The guests smiled. A few murmured, "Hear, hear." Lizzie went on to present a small white box neatly tied in satin ribbon. "This," she said, "has been passed down in my family for 3 generations, a symbol of strength, beauty, and self-respect. And now, Rebecca, it's yours." Rebecca opened it delicately. Inside was a silver locket shaped like a teardrop. Everyone leaned in to admire it. Lizzie's mother clapped softly. A few phones came out to take pictures. I reached for my bag, suddenly unsure if it still belonged in the moment. Neville cleared his throat and gave me a quick warning look. I pulled my hand back. After coffee, someone suggested a slideshow. Lizzie clapped her hands. "Perfect timing," she said. "Neville put it together last week. It's mostly from the last few years, but we dug up some old family gems, too." The screen lit up near the mantel. Soft piano music played under the photos Rebecca in preschool, riding her first bike, winning ribbons, posing with friends. Then a few from earlier baby pictures, toddler years. A shot of Lizzie holding her at the hospital. A few with Neville, younger and slimmer, holding her up to a swing. Then out of nowhere, an image of me popped up. Hair in a scarf apron dusted with flour, holding Rebecca as a newborn in the kitchen I used to call my own. I smiled in the picture, tired but happy. Someone chuckled. "Oh, look, vintage grandma." The next slide was me again, caught mid-laugh wearing a cardigan I'd knit myself. Then another me holding a tray of cookies, one slipper missing. The guests laughed. Not cruelly, not loudly, but enough. Lizzie grinned. "We found a whole bunch of these oldies. Thought we'd toss them in for fun." The slideshow moved on, but something in the room shifted. I felt smaller somehow, like a footnote in someone else's story. Later, as people rose to mingle, and Rebecca opened more gifts, I reached across the table and placed the bag gently by her seat. "This is for you," I said softly. She glanced at it distracted. "Thanks." Lizzie swooped in moments later. "Oh, sweetie, let's keep the table clear. I'll put this with the others." She slid the bag off the table and walked away with it out of sight. I stood up and excused myself to the hallway, suddenly in need of air. I wasn't angry, just hollow. From the doorway, I heard Lizzie's voice again. "Let's not clutter things with hand-me-downs tonight, okay?" Neville laughed. I reached for my coat. I slipped my coat on in the hallway, careful not to make noise. My fingers moved slowly, button by button, like my body knew it was leaving something behind. Laughter from the dining room echoed down the hall, distant and bright. The front door was only a few steps away, and I thought if I walked out now, maybe no one would notice. Maybe that would be better. Rosalind Lizzie's voice cut through before I reached the door. I turned. She stood by the archway arms, crossed one heel, tapping lightly against the hardwood. "You're leaving. I think I've stayed long enough," I said quietly. "It's getting late." She walked toward me, a smile painted on, like always. "You didn't even say goodbye to Rebecca." She looked busy. "Come now," she said, voice dropping just a touch. "You know how important tonight is. We've worked hard to make it perfect." Her eyes drifted down to the small floral brooch pinned to my coat. "Let's not make this about something else." "I didn't say anything," I replied. She took another step closer. "I know that look. Let's not start the guilt routine. Rebecca is surrounded by people who love her. You've done your part. It's fine to let go." Something in my chest shifted, but I held still. I brought her a gift. I'm not sure she received it. She did. "It's been placed with the others," she said. "Though next time, maybe a phone call ahead of time would be helpful. Just so we can prepare." "Prepare for what?" She paused, smile fading just a little. "For the mood, Rosalind. For the atmosphere we're trying to maintain. Not everyone here understands your style of parenting, or your background." I heard it clearly, though. She hadn't raised her voice. That tight, tidy way of saying too much with too few words. Neville appeared behind her. His eyes met mine, then dropped to the floor. "Is everything all right?" "Your mother was just leaving," Lizzie said, touching his arm. He stepped toward me, clearing his throat. "Mom, I think maybe it's best if we all start setting some boundaries. You're always welcome, but these events, they're a little more structured now. More curated." "Curated," I repeated. He nodded. "I know you mean well, but things have changed. Rebecca's older. She needs role models that reflect where she's going." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't seen before. The same boy who used to cry when I dropped him off at school. Who once carried his lunch in a paper bag I'd drawn little hearts on. That boy was gone. This man, he wore nice clothes, had a full head of gray-streaked hair, but his words had been pressed and folded like starched linen. Nothing of me left in them. "I understand," I said. My voice didn't shake. He looked relieved. "Good. I knew you would. You've always been practical." "I'll get my purse," I said. But as I turned, I heard Lizzie's voice again, lower only a few steps behind me. "Rosalind, maybe it's time to accept that you're not part of this phase anymore. Families evolve. So do expectations." I stopped walking. Then I turned back. Neville looked between us. "Please don't make this harder than it has to be." "I didn't come here to make anything hard," I said. I came to give my granddaughter something that belonged to her great-great-grandmother. I thought she might want to know where she comes from. Her future isn't back there, Lizzie replied. It's ahead, with us. And frankly, we've worked very hard to protect her from certain influences. Certain influences, I said. Lizzie didn't flinch. Neville's jaw tightened. There was a silence that stretched too long. Someone walked past the hallway behind them, laughing about something. The world inside the house continued spinning without me. I've never asked for anything from you, I said. Not a thank you, not a photo on the wall. But I thought I believed I was still her grandmother. Neville closed the gap, placed a hand gently on my arm. Mom, he said, voice low. You were. But things are different now. And it's time you let go of the past. I nodded once, just once. Then I pulled his hand from my sleeve, stepped past them both, and opened the front door. The night was cooler than I expected. The wind tugged softly at my coat as I stepped onto the porch. I didn't look back. The cab was still parked across the streetlights off the driver, reading something on his phone. I walked down the steps and tapped the window. He looked up and smiled again, just like before. Everything all right? He asked, unlocking the door. I slid into the seat. Fine, I said. Let's go. As we pulled away from the house, I looked down and realized my hands were still folded neatly in my lap, just like they had been at that long dining room table. But something had shifted, and in the silence of that ride home, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. The morning after the party, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. The sun hadn't yet cleared the trees, and the only sound in the house was the slow hum of the refrigerator. On the counter sat a small ceramic dish with 2 sugar cubes, something I used to put out when Rebecca was little and wanted to stir her tea like mine. It was a quiet habit I never shook. I didn't turn on the news or the radio. I just sat, hands wrapped around the mug, trying to settle into the stillness. But something in me felt loose, like a drawer that wouldn't close all the way. I spent the afternoon going through the hall closet, not for any real reason, just needed something to do with my hands. Old coats, scarves, a few photo albums I hadn't touched in years. I found one from the summer Rebecca turned 4. Popsicles on the porch. Water from the garden hose soaking her curls. There was a picture of her curled up in my lap, face sticky and tired, clutching the stuffed lamb I'd sewn her from a dish towel and leftover cotton. I turned the page and stared at that little girl for a long while. That evening, I called my neighbor Ruth and asked if she wanted to walk with me the next morning. We used to go out twice a week before her knee started acting up. I'd love that, she said. I'll bring the good thermos. At sunrise, we met at the edge of the trail. It was quiet, just the soft crunch of gravel underfoot and the call of a distant bird now and then. Ruth talked about her tomatoes not coming in right and how her grandson had finally found a job at the post office. I listened, grateful for the rhythm of her voice and the steady pace beside me. When we reached the bench overlooking the creek, we sat. The water moved slow this time of year, just enough to keep the dragonflies dancing. Ruth poured coffee into 2 little cups from her thermos and handed me one. She didn't ask about the party. She didn't need to. After a long silence, I said, I think they're done with me. For real this time. Ruth took a sip, nodded. Maybe, or maybe they just think they can be. I looked at the ripples on the water. What do you do when the people you built your life around don't want to include you in the next chapter? Ruth didn't answer right away. You write your own pages, she finally said. And if you're lucky, someone out there still remembers how the story began. We sat a little longer, then walked back the same way we came. When I got home, I made a list. Not a long one, just names people I hadn't seen in years. Old friends from church, a woman I used to work with at the community kitchen. I didn't know if any of them would remember me, but I figured it was worth finding out. That week, I started volunteering again just 2 mornings a week at the shelter on Maple. Folding linens, organizing dry goods, nothing fancy. There was a woman named Denise who ran the front counter. She wore big earrings and always brought in those soft mints that melt in your mouth. We started having lunch together on Tuesdays. She told me about her sister's new baby, about her dog with arthritis, about how she'd once dreamed of opening a bakery but never quite got there. I told her about Neville, about Rebecca. She never said much back, but she always listened. One day, she brought me a jar of apple butter. "You look like the kind of woman who still keeps toast in the freezer," she said. She wasn't wrong. In early spring, I visited the library and asked about starting a genealogy workshop for seniors. Just a small group, nothing official. The librarian, a young man with kind eyes and a sleeve tattoo peeking from under his cardigan, said, "Why not?" He reserved a corner table for me every Thursday morning. The first week, only 2 people showed up. One brought a faded birth certificate. The other had a box of letters so old the paper crumbled at the corners. We shared stories, laughed about old addresses and maiden names no one could spell. By the 4th week, there were 7 of us. Then 10. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking about Rebecca, wondering if she remembered the mirror, if she even opened it, if she knew what it meant to me, to the women before me. But I didn't dwell. I had my Thursdays. I had the sound of voices turning pages of laughter in the middle of old memories. One day, while shelving binders after the group had left, the young librarian came over. "You've got a nice turnout," he said. "People seem to really like you." I smiled. "They like the stories," I said. "That's all anybody really wants, to know where they came from." He looked down at the table. "Funny thing, I found this in the drop box this morning." He handed me a small padded envelope with no return address. Just my name typed neatly and the library's. Inside was the mirror. No note, no explanation. Just the silver frame, cool to the touch, wrapped in lavender tissue I recognized. I didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at it under the light. "Everything all right?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes," I said. "I think it will be." As I walked home with the mirror in my coat pocket, the wind picked up. The trees along the sidewalk swayed gently, the air full of those tiny petals that fall like snow in early spring. That night, I took the mirror out and placed it on my dresser. Not because I needed it, but because it belonged there. It was early summer when Denise asked if I wanted to help plan the community center's family history event. She said they needed someone who could guide folks through building their first family trees, someone with patience and a way with people. I told her I wasn't sure I had either, but she waved that off with a smile. "You're the only one who knows how to listen without jumping in. That's rarer than you think." So I agreed. The first meeting was held in the back room of the center, where folding chairs squeaked and the air always smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. There were 5 of us at the start. Denise, a high school student named Mia, who wanted extra credit, a retired librarian named Harold, and a woman named Grace, who brought in a shoebox full of photos wrapped in rubber bands. I brought a tin of cookies, just like my mother used to. Over the next few weeks, word got out. People trickled in. Some stayed, some didn't. But the ones who stayed came early and left late. They brought newspaper clippings, old yearbooks, marriage certificates, even a few faded military patches. One woman found out her grandfather had changed his last name when he came over from Ireland. Another traced her mother's side all the way back to a farmstead in North Carolina. The joy on their faces when they found a name they thought was lost. It settled something deep in me. One afternoon, while I was sorting census forms into labeled folders, Mia handed me a piece of paper with a sheepish look. "I hope this isn't weird," she said, "but we're learning about local women in history for school. I asked my teacher if I could write about you." I looked at the paper. The heading read, "Rosalind Barrow, Quiet Keeper of Community Roots." I didn't say much, just folded it carefully and tucked it into my purse. Later that week, Ruth came by with 2 slices of peach pie in a paper bag. "Heard you've become a local celebrity," she said, settling into my porch chair like she'd always belonged there. We ate the pie with forks from the kitchen drawer, the same kind I used to serve Neville when he was little. "I'm thinking of starting a small scholarship," I said between bites. "For students who want to study history or archives. Doesn't have to be much. Just enough to keep someone going." Ruth looked at me. "What made you think of that?" "I don't know," I said. "Maybe I just want someone to remember that stories matter." She nodded slow and steady. "Well, if you need a name for it, call it the Rebecca Fund. That girl came from you no matter what they pretend." I didn't answer, but I held the thought. That weekend, I went down to the courthouse to check on some old public records. The clerk was out, but her assistant offered to pull what I needed. We got to chatting while she worked. Turns out her father and mine had worked together at the mill back before I was born. She said, "You know, Mrs. Barrow, you ought to write some of this down. I mean it. Folks need to hear it." That night, I sat at my dining room table with a fresh notebook and my favorite pen. I didn't know where to begin, so I started with what I knew best: names, dates, places. 1 page turned into 3, then 10. I wrote late into the evening, the kind of quiet where the only sound was the rustle of paper and the occasional creak of the floor settling. The next day, I mailed a copy of the scholarship proposal to the community center board. Denise had helped me write the formal parts. I just added a note at the end for every grandchild who doesn't yet know where they came from. 2 weeks later, I received a letter with the center's seal on it. They'd approved the fund. Matching donors had already come forward. Mia had even designed a little flyer to advertise it around town. They asked if I'd be willing to speak at the summer fair, just a few words about the project and why it mattered. I said I'd try. The fair was held behind the high school in that wide-open field with the long wooden stage they drag out every year. I wore my pale yellow dress and brought a folding fan just in case the heat picked up. Denise met me by the lemonade stand and walked me over to the stage stairs. "Just talk like you do at the workshop," she whispered. "That's all they need." I don't remember everything I said, but I remember looking out at the folding chairs filled with people. Some I knew, some I didn't, and realizing that even though I hadn't meant to build anything, something had quietly grown around me. A circle of people who showed up, who remembered. After the event, while I was packing up, a man in a checked shirt approached me. He introduced himself as a reporter from the local paper. Said he'd like to write a piece about the scholarship, maybe include some of my story if I was willing. I agreed. The article ran the following Sunday, tucked in between the classifieds and the weather. It was titled, "Grandmother Plants, a Legacy of Memory." I clipped it out, flattened the page, and slipped it into the same envelope where I'd kept Rebecca's old drawing, the one she made when she was 6, all stick figures and sunshine. By then, it had been over a month since I'd received the mirror in the mail, and I still hadn't heard a word from Neville. But something was shifting. A neighbor dropped by with an envelope of family photos she wanted help identifying. A teenage boy from down the street asked if I'd look over his essay on World War II. The librarian reserved a special shelf for our workshop materials labeled History Corner. I was no longer waiting to be invited in. I had built something on my own. It was late September when the letter arrived. Plain white envelope, my name typed neatly on the front, no return address. The postmark said, Raleigh. I opened it at the kitchen table, the kettle whistling in the background, the window fogged with steam from the morning chill. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Typed. No greeting. No sign-off. It read, "I'm sorry for what happened at the party." I didn't know she planned that. I should have stood up. I didn't. I've been thinking about that day ever since. There's a lot I wish I could say. If you're willing, I'd like to meet. It was signed simply Neville. I sat there for a long time. The kettle had stopped whistling, and the house had gone quiet again. I folded the letter, once placed it in the drawer where I kept the sugar packets and tea bags. Then I went about my day. 2 mornings later, I wrote him back. I didn't say much. Just Saturday at 3, same park, bench by the footbridge. The bench was still there. The paint a little more chipped, the wood weathered in spots. I got there early, brought a small thermos of coffee and 2 paper cups. Around 3:15, I saw him coming down the path, hands in his jacket pockets, head down like he was counting his steps. He looked older. Not tired, just older. Like life had added something behind his eyes that hadn't been there before. He sat down beside me without a word. For a while, we just listened to the creek. Finally, he said, "Rebecca doesn't know I wrote you." I nodded. She's angry. Or maybe not angry. Cold. She keeps everything wrapped tight. Has since she was a teenager. Said you put on a show that day. That it was manipulative. I told her she was wrong, but she wouldn't hear it. He paused, reached down and picked up a small stone from the edge of the path. "I don't know how to fix this," he said, "but I wanted to see you. I wanted to say it to your face. I was wrong." I poured coffee into the paper cups, handed him one. We sat that way for almost an hour. Talked about nothing and everything. How the tomatoes turned out this year. How his back acts up in the rain. How he still listens to Dad's old records on Sunday mornings, even though they're all scratched. As he got up to leave, he hesitated. "She misses you," he said. I looked at him. He tried to smile. She just doesn't know how to show it. Then, he walked back the way he came. I didn't hear from him for weeks after that. I figured maybe that was the end of it. A quiet apology on a wooden bench, and life moved on. But 2 days before Thanksgiving, there was another envelope. This one had a card inside. A picture of a tree, branches, full leaves, gold and red. Inside, just a single sentence. "If you're not busy Thursday, we'd like to have you." It wasn't signed, but I recognized the handwriting. Neville's. Careful small script, like he always used when addressing Christmas cards. I placed the card on the mantel, stared at it for a long time. Then I called Ruth. "You think I should go?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Just said, "Do you want to?" "I don't know." "Well," she said, "that's your answer. If you don't know, then it's worth finding out." Thanksgiving morning, I baked a pecan pie. My mother's recipe. I wore the same maroon blouse I'd worn to Rebecca's high school graduation. Took out the good earrings. When I pulled into their driveway, the lights inside were already on. Through the window, I saw movement. Neville in the kitchen, someone at the table. My hands tightened on the pie plate. I walked slowly to the front door. Rebecca opened it. She didn't say anything at first. Just looked at me like she wasn't sure what to do with the moment. Then quietly, she said, "Hi." "Hi," I replied. "I brought pie." She stepped aside. "Come in." The living room looked the same, beige walls, framed school photos, a crocheted blanket I'd made years ago still draped over the couch. The table was set for 6. Rebecca's husband nodded at me. The twins waved shyly. One had her hair in the same side ponytail Rebecca wore when she was 8. Neville handed me a cup of cider. We talked in low voices. Nothing heavy, just present. When we sat to eat, Rebecca took a long breath. She looked at me, then at the others. "I didn't invite Grandma last year," she said. "That was my choice, not Dad's." Silence. I thought, I thought it was the right thing at the time. I didn't want drama. I didn't want to feel guilty. But maybe guilt isn't always the worst thing to feel. Sometimes it's the only way we know something mattered. She looked back down at her plate. I'm glad you're here. The clink of silverware broke the pause. Conversation picked back up, gentle and cautious, but warm. After dinner, the girls asked if I wanted to help decorate the little tree they kept in the corner for the holidays. I said yes. We hung tiny glass ornaments and strung popcorn on thread. Rebecca handed me the last ornament, an angel with silver wings and a crooked smile. She said, I think she's supposed to be you. We both laughed, quietly. As I was leaving, Nabil walked me to the door. Thank you for coming, he said. I nodded. Maybe Christmas, he added, not as a question, but as something possible. I didn't answer, just gave his hand a quick squeeze before walking to my car. That night, I set the card back on the mantel. Next to it, I placed a photo of the girls holding their popcorn garland. The angel ornament leaned against the frame. There was still distance, still questions that might never be answered. But something had shifted, and this time, it felt like it might hold. Christmas Eve came with a dusting of snow and a sky the color of cold steel. I'd just finished placing the last set of candles in the windows when the phone rang. It was Nabil. He said, There's something I'd like to give you. Could you come by? His voice was steady, but I heard something in it, something careful. When I arrived, the house was quiet. Rebecca wasn't there. Just Nabil, standing near the fireplace, holding a slim manila envelope. I didn't want to send this through the mail, he said. Figured if you hated it, at least you'd be able to hand it back. I sat on the edge of the couch while he poured us each a cup of cider. The envelope was warm in my hands, like it had been resting near the heater. My name was written on the front in his careful handwriting. Inside were papers, legal ones. The top read, Transfer of Ownership Property at 113 Maple Ridge Lane. I blinked. That's your house. He nodded. It was supposed to go to Rebecca, he said. That was the plan for years, but things change. I looked at him, unsure what to say. She doesn't want it, he continued. She and Marcus are moving. Said she has no use for a house full of ghosts. Her words. He sat across from me, hands clasped in front of him. I thought about selling it, but then I thought, no one's loved this place more than you have. Every corner of that house has your touch. The garden, the wallpaper, the creaky stairs you never wanted fixed. You made it a home. It should be yours. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. He handed me the pen. Just sign if you want it. No pressure. The air felt thick. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. I signed. 2 days later, the deed was recorded. The following weekend, I walked through the old place with a ring of keys in my hand. The living room smelled faintly of cedar. Upstairs, the bedroom still had the lace curtains I'd sewn the summer before Rebecca turned 16. In the attic, tucked into an old cedar chest, I found a yellowing envelope. No address. Just my name again. It was from Evelyn, written years ago. Mom, it began. If you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I didn't say goodbye in person. I needed to go, and I didn't think you'd understand. You've always believed the best in people. I couldn't see what you saw in Dad. Not after what happened. I needed distance. I needed quiet. But I never stopped loving you. There were tear stains across the bottom. I hope someday I'll come back and find you here. If I don't, just know I was always your daughter. Dills along the back fence, just like I used to. Neville helped till the soil his knees cracking with every bend. We didn't talk about Rebecca much after that. Sometimes things settle on their own if you leave room. One afternoon, Ruth came by with a peach cobbler and an envelope of old photos she'd found while cleaning out her closet. We sat on the porch and flipped through them, Evelyn on a tricycle, Rebecca in a school play, Neville wearing a ridiculous holiday sweater. And in the very last photo, one I didn't remember taking, we were all in the kitchen. I was at the stove, Evelyn beside me stirring something in a bowl. Rebecca was in the background, reaching for a cookie, her mouth open in laughter. Ruth handed it to me. "You should frame this." I did. I placed it on the mantel beside Evelyn's letter, beside the tiny glass angel the girls had given me last year. Some wounds stay. But so do the people who try to heal them, and sometimes that's more than enough. The photo stayed on the mantel through spring and summer. I'd walk past it each morning with my tea, sometimes pausing just long enough to run a thumb across the frame. There was something steadying about it, seeing all of us in one room before life bent and broke in the ways it did. Rebecca didn't come home that summer. She called twice. Once to ask about a recipe she remembered from childhood. Another time, just to say she'd been thinking about the daffodils out back. Neville stopped by most Sundays. Sometimes with Ruth, sometimes with a pie, always with a quiet kind of company. He'd started taking care of his blood pressure and talking more about retiring. Said the house next door to mine had gone up for sale, and maybe, just maybe, he was tired of driving. By fall, we had a rhythm. The garden came in with full heads of cabbage and late tomatoes. I canned what I could, gave the rest to neighbors. Life was slower now, but not smaller. One afternoon, while sorting through the top of the hall closet, I found an old voicemail tape recorder, the kind we used back when phones had cords and messages clicked in one by one. I almost tossed it, but something made me press play. The machine whirred to life. There were dozens of messages, some from the girls, some from Ruth. One from Evelyn, dated 6 months before she left. "Hi, Mom. I know you're probably at work. Just wanted to hear your voice. Nothing urgent. I'll stop by later." Her voice sounded so young, so certain she'd be able to stop by. I sat on the floor of the hallway, the recorder still humming in my hand. Time has a way of folding in on itself. You think you're through the worst of it, and then a sound, a photo, a season changes, and the memory returns full and sharp. But that year, more than any before, I learned that grief doesn't have to end for peace to begin. Neville moved in next door that November. We didn't make a thing of it. He just showed up with a truck and a thermos, and I helped him unload boxes labeled books, tools, kitchen maybe. That Christmas, I hosted dinner. Just 4 of us, Neville, Ruth, my neighbor Claire, and me. The table was simple. Ham potatoes, green beans, and a lemon cake I hadn't made in years. Halfway through dessert, the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and there stood Rebecca. She didn't say anything right away, just held out a gift, wrapped in brown paper, a ribbon tied by hand. "I wasn't sure you'd answer," she said. I stepped aside. "Come in." She sat beside me at the table, folded her hands, and looked around the room like she was searching for something she'd once known. The box held a framed photo, one I hadn't seen before. Me standing in the backyard, Evelyn and Rebecca on either side, the garden blooming behind us. I didn't remember when it was taken, but I knew I'd keep it close. We didn't talk about the past that night, just the food, the snow, how quiet everything felt. And maybe that was enough. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't need an apology. Sometimes healing looks like showing up with a simple gift, a quiet presence, and the willingness to begin again. I think we all reach an age where we stop chasing grand resolutions. What matters more is kindness, returned, dignity restored, and the courage to stay open even when we've been hurt. So, if you've made it this far with me, thank you. If any part of this story reminded you of something or someone from your own life, I hope you'll share it in the comments. And if you're still listening, maybe hit that follow button. I'll be right here, one story at a time.